Chapter 45, Dying on the Table. We all hear stories about people who undergo major and risky operations to save their lives. Sometimes these are so risky, the outcomes are not in their favor to survive. In some cases, the crash happens during surgery, and more than one story is told about a person dying on the table while undergoing the risky procedure. The miracle is that they survive anyway. Once we had nailed down our new location, we had to get contractor bids to see if a build-out was even feasible for the $160,000 we had left before we inked a deal to buy. Several contractors pitched ideas and plans way out of our price range. One gave us a time and materials bid that fit our ideas, providing there were no major surprises and that much of the work could be done by our teams of volunteers at key points in the build-out. The risk was high. Something always goes wrong in construction. It's not what we wanted to do, but the alternative was just to roll over and die. We saw it as a risky, life-saving surgery. Escape plans out of Zombieland are never easy. For many weeks, our services consisted of showing up at the new site and holding our simple devotional service and then tearing down walls and ceilings for hours afterward. Many times, some of the non-physical workers provided lunch for the team. We laughed and played and had a great time among all the dirt and sweat. It wasn't so bad until we had to tear out the restrooms and went to a single outhouse. Our plan was only to endure such suffering until early November, when we would have a new restrooms online. Little did we know that our single outhouse would serve us through the winter, clear past the new year. In any remodel of this magnitude, the more you pull down, the more you see. Sometimes it meant major changes in plumbing or electric plans. Sometimes it resulted in aesthetic issues. The existing ceiling was a double-height affair with long rows of institutional fluorescent light banks that produced flickering, headache-inducing light. Our plan was to raise the lower portions of the ceiling, which were about 8 feet tall, to the 11-foot height of the main ceiling area. Once we began to demo things, we realized there was a ceiling above the upper ceiling. It was as if someone put in a low ceiling in the 1970s underneath the original 1941 ceiling. We peeked through both layers and found this outstanding shiplap, tongue and groove wooden ceiling with these incredible black iron cross beams of the original construction. The decision was immediately made to tear out the entire ceiling over the main area, exposing the fantastic architectural feature. This raised the ceiling height to 13 feet and gave us built-in trusses for stage lighting. We then had to consider issues of insulation, which were in flux anyway. We knew the existing roof was in rough shape, but our original thoughts and the bid proposal was to simply patch it for the cost of around $6,000. The roof turned out to be far worse than anticipated and had to be replaced. But this meant we could insulate the entire building with a new roof, adding more to the cost but saving thousands in interior changes. The new insulation roof cost about $40,000. Our plans meant that any huge change like that resulted in cuts elsewhere. We had to scale back lighting, restroom ideas, and dump our kitchen equipment plans immediately. We pressed on with a scaled-down version of our ideas, but it was still going to work, and the overall designs were going to be pretty cool. One day, our Homeless Coalition meeting had a candidates forum prior to the election. State representatives and senators came to discuss issues pertaining to the coalition and homeless advocacy. I introduced myself to Marcus Riccelli, one of our 2 local state representatives. He came up to see our under-construction site, get a tour, and hear about our vision. "What do you need from me?" he asked in a tone that hinted he was eager to help. I answered in a casual way, like I was asking for bus fare to get downtown. "I need you to help me access grants to get $15,000 in kitchen equipment." "Okay," he said, just as casually as a guy reaching into his pocket for spare change. "Each representative has access to some discretionary funds for our districts, for projects just like this. I can get that for you." I was stunned. A few days later, I filled out a couple pages for a grant application and sent it back. The next session of the state representatives approved it, and they sent us another 20 pages of documents and verification paperwork to fill out. It was a reimbursement grant. We had to raise the money first, but at least this grant was there to access when the time came to buy kitchen equipment. About 2/3 of the way into the construction, things began to slow down. In late October, I would come to my little outdoor portable office shed like one sees on construction sites, and I realized no one was on the work site that day. Crews came only once or twice a week after that, and by the first week in November, no one showed up anymore. We were nowhere close to being finished. My calls were not returned. Many of the guys in the plumbing, electric, and carpentry side had started donating hours of work just to try and help get us done. But the end zone was simply too far away to keep running down the field and getting hit. I knew that we were out of money, but our contractor was reticent to tell us. He had spent several weeks trying to get crews to donate time to us. He had succeeded as long as possible. We weren't built out enough to get anywhere close to opening. We were flatline, dead on the table. Beep. We needed a new floor. The restrooms weren't completed. Wires still hung from areas around the building, and walls weren't textured or painted. We were thousands of dollars away from finishing. The thing we dreaded most, having surprises, had happened too often. We set up a meeting just after Thanksgiving to discuss the bad news. I admit, I was mad that we weren't told when we were down to the last $10,000 or so. I would have told the contractor to stop everything and just finish the ladies' restroom if nothing else had got done. We had a single outhouse for 4 months during the winter cold and snow. My wife and daughters had taken to going to the bathroom at home before getting in the car to go to church. Time for church, the call would go out, only to hear the patter of feet rush to the restrooms, even if they didn't have to go. None of my girls wanted to get caught at church needing to use the outhouse. I'm sure several other ladies did the same. But still, they came. Still they sang. Still they prayed. Still they worked. I walked through the abandoned, cold, and empty site every day in the middle of November. The silence was deafening after all those weeks of construction sounds. I prayed a lot. I knew we were broke, but I hadn't been officially told yet by the contractor. Under these conditions, there was no way we could open and get an occupancy permit. The work needed to get the restrooms and electric work done were huge in themselves, let alone everything else that was needed. After all the risk and years of hardship on behalf of this church and its ministries, I felt more than a little cheated. Discouragement is too soft a word to explain my feelings. Anxiety and tension were a constant state of being. My daily prayers were like, "Hey God, if you knew this was going to be the result, then we shouldn't have even started. We now have an unusable, unsellable building. We don't know what to do, and we don't know how to solve this." I was at the end of all my answers. "You better do something because we sure can't do anything. We're out of effort and we're out of ideas." It was a tough Thanksgiving week. 2 days before our meeting with the contractor, at which we knew he planned to tell us that we were hopelessly broke, a $20,000 surprise check came in the mail. Again, it turned out that a very old covenant member who forgot to change her will as she left many years before, incidentally or by God's perfect design, left us a nice-sized chunk of money. We were perhaps the beneficiaries of her negligence. The woman had died almost a year before, and after a lot of probate and court arguments, the dust settled, and we were the recipients of that $20,000. We had no idea about any of this. It wasn't enough to finish the job, but like a relay race, the baton was being passed for at least running the next distance. We picked it up and we ran. While we turned the contractor loose on finishing the women's restroom as cheap as possible, a bunch of guys in the church set out putting down a new floor. We worked through the Christmas break with our teachers, students, and anyone who could take a day off while we laid subflooring down. Next, we got a super sweet deal from a professional floorer to lay the tile. We advanced one more level after being totally dead. It wasn't enough to get us across the finish line, but we sure were closer. 14 months earlier, when we first received the offer to sell, we had planned on opening in September of 2014. We were at that point about 5 months behind schedule. We began to pray for a way to open by Easter of 2015. We went through the $20,000 quickly and found ourselves broke and dead on the table again just after the new year. We were still far from being finished. In my associations with the coalition members, I had met many leaders in various nonprofit agencies who work with the poor. Many of them were aware of our plans to turn the church square footage into a job training coffee shop during the week for poverty culture people and former addicts and convicts. They loved the idea and thought more churches should think that creatively. The guy who was the Mormon Church's head person for organizing all the various members of Spokane County to do community outreach works dropped by one day. He was a friend of mine from all the meetings we had sat in together. "Wow, this place is cool," he exclaimed as he walked through one cold day in early January. "When are you going to get finished and open?" That's a funny story," I began. I told him of our economic situation. "Well, I used to own a painting business," he informed me. "How about if I could get a crew down here to paint the base coat of everything in one day? Do you think you could afford the paint? It should be around $600. "Yeah, I could swing that," I answered enthusiastically. We picked a day for him to come down. "By the way, if you could prepare the outside of the building for us, we'll come down when the weather gets warm in March and paint that too." So the Mormons painted us for free. A new economics professor at Whitworth University, which is a Presbyterian school, was a friend of mine, and she contacted me a few days later. "Do you think your church would have a work project that our business club could fulfill?" she asked. "And if you could take about half an hour to share the vision of the church at the time, that'd be great," she added. We had the University Business Club prepare the outside of the building by taking down signs, scraping old paint, and fixing some exterior problems. The Mormons painted us at zero cost, inside and out. We saved about $15,000 on that one. Presbyterians and Mormons combined to help build an evangelical covenant church. We were flatlined again, but it wasn't over yet. Our downtown location was right next door to a drug addiction recovery facility run by a local church called the Dream Center. This one is not affiliated with the famous one in Los Angeles. They needed some work projects for their 40 or so men. We proposed a deal with them. Every Tuesday and Thursday, 30 to 40 guys in various stages of recovery arrived and did all the interior detail painting for only the cost of cheeseburgers, which we bought across the street from our new place. So Mormons and drug addicts painted us for no-cost labor. We just paid for paint and cheeseburgers. Late January 2015, I happened to have a meeting with Rob McCann, the head of Catholic Charities for the entire eastern side of Washington State. After our meeting, he asked how things were going in our new build-out. I offered to show him, so we drove up to the site. Catholic Charities builds multi-million-dollar housing complexes and homeless shelters in our town, among the many other things they do for the poor. He walked our site and was simply stunned at how much we had accomplished and how far we had come on only $160,000. "This is actually amazing," he said with awe and wonder. "This could easily be a $500,000 project." I was simultaneously pleased that we had done so well, yet embarrassed that we were so blatantly ignorant when we entered into the project. After a long pause, while looking around, he added, "Well, how much do you need to finish and open?" I let out one of those exasperated, defeated sighs and said disgustedly, "We're probably $75,000 short." "I think I can get you that," he said, as cheerfully as if he was offering to buy lunch. It turns out that concerning their grants and loans for buildings, the organization can't pocket any leftovers from grants received. Any money left must go towards another charity doing similar work for the poverty culture. And our cafe counted. We got a $50,000 grant from the Catholics to help us finish by my completion of some simple paperwork. That huge amount took us almost to the end, but we were still going to fall short by about $20,000. This was going to be the third time we crashed on a table under construction before opening. When Mars Hill fell apart, they decided to close all their churches that had no chance of individual survival. They sold several properties, paid off debts, and redistributed money to the dozen or so surviving satellite campuses, which then became independent churches. The little group of 100 people who were going to plant the Mars Hill campus on our old building downtown felt very strongly that they had an excellent chance to keep going. They changed their name to Redemption Church and became independent. One of the sites they sold was the main flagship building in Ballard, a neighboring area of Seattle. A sister church in our denomination, Quest Church, was negotiating the deal to purchase it. The same guy, Raleigh Person from our Chicago headquarters, who had negotiated our sale, was negotiating that deal. A year or so later, I would learn from Raleigh that Mars Hill had been discussing simply dumping the remainder of our contract and walking away. Because of the sale of the Ballard campus was several $1,000,000, he implicated that they had to do right by us in Spokane or no sale would happen in Seattle. In late February, Mars Hill informed us that they would pay off their debt for the remaining $5,000 per month that they owed on the principal. This amounted to a $75,000 payout. They would also give enough cash to Redemption Church in Spokane to cover the other $5,000 in rent payments for the next year and a half. This unexpected cash payout put us over the top. It was the final electric zap bringing us back to life. Had Mars Hill not crashed, we never would have received that sum at that time. We probably would not have opened. Redemption Church agreed that by May of 2016, the final payoff balance of around $900,000 would be satisfied. If they couldn't pay it, we'd be forced to repossess the downtown building, but that was more than a year away. With this $75,000, we were put over the top of our budget requirement for completion. Mars Hill's death meant we would live. We hustled throughout February and March to finish everything we needed. Easter week, we were still scrambling. We held an open house to show off the site on the Wednesday night before Easter. We served lots of coffee drinks that night. 200 people came by to support us. On Good Friday, we still needed our occupancy permit to open. The offices in the planning department closed at noon. At 11 a.m., we were just able to run down there with paperwork to finish it off. We still needed 2 more inspections. The secretary there put out an email and asked if any of their inspectors would volunteer to help us out. She actually used the phrase, "Let's give them an Easter miracle," in her email. Several inspectors showed up and cleared us. We got our occupancy permit on Good Friday right at closing hours. After 127 years of existence, we held our first service on Easter Sunday, 2015, in our new location. 141 people showed up, including some Mormons and some Catholics. Moreover, I didn't see any dogs in church that day.